Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at www.publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website, www.publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review Podcast, and have a great day.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, this podcast has been ranked by Apple as one of the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. So I'd like to say thank you to all of my guests and listeners for being the basis for this accomplishment. Now, question, what are the lessons and skills learned on the path from being a contributor to a Los Angeles newspaper to being director of speech writing for Israel's permanent mission to the United Nations, or also being senior communications director and speechwriter for an Israeli ambassador? Add to that, he was a policy director at the Homeland Security Advisory Council and a Goldman Fellow at the Transatlantic Institute in Belgium. My guest today is Nathan Miller, founder of Miller Inc., that's with an I-N-K, a public relations firm located in Los Angeles, California. He is now a communications strategist sought out by executives at the highest levels of business, government, and the nonprofit world, and helping hundreds of organizations to tell their stories better and to navigate complex issues and crises globally. Nathan has been recognized by an Israeli newspaper as one of the 10 young Jews who will change the world, and as one of Southern California's 40 most inspiring entrepreneurs under 40. And he has both his MA and Master's from UCLA. So welcome. So Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's really great to be here.
Look, you have had some great experiences. And I think it might be wise if we could have you sort of go over what some of those experiences were and what you've learned along the way. Because like myself, we've done a lot of things and we've learned a lot, and it has helped us tremendously in our careers. So why don't you just pick it up where you want to start and where you want to start, what you were doing, and the experiences that you've had.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me. I've had a varied career. For the last 11 years, I've been running my own strategic communications firm, headquartered in LA, as you said, with, we have team in New York and San Francisco as well. And building and growing and nurturing that firm to the size it is today has definitely been the big project of my career, I would say. But prior to that, I had a lot of experiences that certainly informed the way I think about this work, certainly contributed to the way that the skills that I've learned. And so I can talk a little bit about that. So, I was in getting my undergraduate and the master's in public policy in the years right after 9/11, when national security and foreign policy were big in the culture and were fascinating to me. I thought I would go into U.S. government, and I got my master's in public policy at UCLA. I did that. I spent some time in Brussels working with the EU institutions, and I thought when I graduated, got my master's, I would go into either some sort of national security field or work in Washington. But one thing led to another, and I got a job helping to be the policy director at a think tank called the Homeland Security Advisory Council, and then I spent 2 years working in a local public affairs firm here in Los Angeles, where I learned a lot. And in 2010, I had this, from some people who I had met during my time in Brussels, there was this job listing that came out to be the chief speechwriter for Israel's mission to the United Nations. Now, I thought there was no way I was going to get that job. I was sure of it. And I said, there's no way me. I was 25 at the time that I'm qualified to do it. But I thought, you know what, there's no harm in sending in my resume. So I published some columns, as you mentioned, and I sent in some of my writing. And there was a few hundred people who applied to that job, I know. And for whatever reason, the ambassador at the time liked the stuff that I'd written, and he said, I want this guy to interview with us. So I found myself in New York and interviewed. It was a big cattle call interview. They had a lot of people interview, and all of a sudden they'd offered me the job. And that really was a big pivot point in my career. I was the only American working on the staff there, the only native English speaker, and I had a lot of volume. So I was the only speechwriter for the entire mission to the United Nations, and so it was about 20, 30 speeches a week sometimes. So you had to learn to be quick. You had to learn to to sort of focus and not get tired and not get fatigued. And I was there for 3 years during a really interesting, pivotal time in the development of the Middle East. I was there for the outbreak of the Arab Spring, for the Palestinian UN statehood bid, through 2 wars in which Israel was involved in, through Iran sanctions. And that, there's a lot of experiences I could talk about, but I learned so much from that experience. And in 2013, when I was, we can go back and I can share some stories from my time at the UN. In 2013, after I'd done that for 3 years, on a very small salary in New York City, I basically ran out of money, and I said I got to do something. I thought at the time that there was an opportunity to open a new kind of firm. I'll just go back in 2008. When I was at this public affairs firm, one of our clients was the Dodgers, the LA Dodgers, the baseball team. And I remember I was a freshman in college when Facebook came out. And I remember setting up the Dodgers' first Facebook page and sitting in the conference room with the executives at the LA Dodgers and then saying, what is this crazy thing called Facebook? It's totally irrelevant to our business. And I said, I think you guys might be wrong about that. And so we set up this thing, and they were sort of laughing. We said it was playful, but I saw how, when I was at the UN as well, I saw how the media environment was really changing. It was funny. Susan Rice, who was the U.S. ambassador at the time, famously said, when asked if she was going to be on Twitter when she took the job, she said, I don't do diplomacy by haiku, which was pretty funny. But, within a year, she was on Twitter and pretty popular on there, and she started engaging in that way. And I set up the first social media account for the Israeli government at the UN, and that became a big part of our communications strategy. And I just saw how media was changing, and I felt like there was something that I could contribute with a new firm. And that's what we've built with Miller Inc. is, our motto is PR is dead, meaning the traditional way that people think about things often is no longer relevant. And you have to have strategic understanding of who you're trying to reach, what are you trying to achieve, what's the message you want to deliver, but also tactical sophistication to navigate all the different tools and techniques that have emerged. And obviously the environment's changed tremendously since I opened the firm 11 years ago. But I felt like, I could do something different. And thankfully, we've found a lot of clients that agree. So that's been great.
One of the important things I heard you say, because I felt the same way some years ago, I got a call from a friend. He said, look, there's a member of Congress who's looking for a press secretary. And at the time, Washington, D.C. is my hometown, so I lived there. And he said, he's looking for a press secretary. I said, well, I don't really know anything about Congress, so forth and so on. He said, well, you know something about PR, don't you? I said, sure. He said, well, at least just go up there and give it a shot. So I did, and talked to the first person that was interviewing me and did everything I thought I could do. But then I realized, because I had worked at the National Education Association, I called some friends of mine down there. It happened that the guy, I did not know it at the time, but the guy was chairman of the House Education Labor Committee. I said, well, do you know anybody in this congressman's office? And they said, oh, I know the chief of staff. They set me up with an interview up there, went up there, talked with them, background, blah, 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 blah. Next thing I know, I had a job within 1 week. So
isn't that how life is? I always say, what I try to teach my team is, you have the right to be at every table. You got to see yourself in that way, but you also have to have the humility. It doesn't matter how big you get, to be able to continue to listen and never think you're too good for any table. It's both things, And I think that the people who succeed in life are the ones who are willing to go and take that shot, even when it's a little bit uncomfortable, when it feels a little outside of what would be perceived as the correct thing. And I totally agree. That's how that's how I got that break, which was probably the biggest break I've had professionally.
And you know what it turned out to be? I did find out that the PR side of it wasn't that difficult. What I had to learn, in my while I was up there, is the process of Congress. And thank goodness I came on board when Congress takes their recess. Not only do you have the committees, you've got subcommittees. I mean, all the different legislation that's coming down the pike. And I also realized that I did not have to know all the nuts and bolts of all the bills that they're writing. I could know some talking points, but what I need, if somebody wants to get down in the bushes, I can go get the legislative aide who wrote it and talk to them. So, I mean, I'm learning how to use the resources that were there and how people get along with each other. Everybody has to give a little and get a little so that, they are all on the same page. It's not a one-way street, my way or no way. It does not work that way up there.
That's right. And I think that totally makes sense, and I think that's true about anything. And, it's certainly true in my business today. Another thing I tell my team a lot, you always want, in my business, you always want the other guy to feel like they got the better end of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's a reporter you're working with, whether that's a client, whether that's a vendor. If you have a zero-sum mentality that you're trying to beat people all the time, it's not going to work out so well for you.
Mm-hmm.
And life is really a repeat game that way. And so always thinking about, how do I make this person feel good about the interaction they had with me just now, or she had with me just now? And I think that's really important.
Well, here's another thing that I learned too, is that, and this was from a reporter up on Capitol Hill, said, well, if you really want to get something, get the best out of a reporter, give them everything they need right up front. So if they're talking about a piece of legislation, here are the high points of the legislation. Here's what he's done. Blah blah blah, all those features. By the way, if you really want to move a little further and interested, I can arrange for you to have a sit-down interview with them. Because what I heard, a lot of reporters, some of them aren't as aggressive as others. And, the more you give them, the better off you are, and perhaps the more shots that you have at that particular newspaper or a radio or a TV access.
Absolutely. I totally agree. That's really important, is helping. Your job is to help the reporter do his job or her job better.
Mm-hmm.
That's just it. And that, it's also to protect your client and make sure that they're getting the right kind of coverage and shaping it. But, at its core, it's also that.
The other thing I know we talked about before we did the interview is the fact that there's a lot of problem solving that goes on in the job of public relations. How do we make this thing happen? And, some of the jobs I've had where I actually had to learn, and I did learn the job, how to uplink and downlink satellite programs. I learned that. Oh, wow. And that came in handy when I was asked to produce a program at the Department of Education and make sure that all the, a lot of the junior colleges around the country could see it. So I had that skill, how to do that and where to go and who to talk to. And, that came out, thankfully, very, very well. With 132 downlink sites around the country. So that you go into these jobs and you learn things that you can apply other places.
Absolutely. No. Every day, most of my day is spent solving problems at this point. We have about 20 folks on my team who are also solving problems, but, the little problems get solved and the bigger problems get pushed up the chain. So you get the bigger problems usually. And, whether that problem is an upset client or a story that didn't go well or a story we're trying to get placed or a client that's in a bind or a complicated matter you're trying to sort through, or the problems of running a business. That's another thing that when I started my company, I was 28 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know the first thing about running a business. I couldn't spell QuickBooks. and I had to, and it was all on-the-job training. And thankfully, I started at a young enough age where I wasn't married yet. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a mortgage. Some of those pressures were off, so I had the space over years to learn these things, mostly the hard way. But there's no better educator than that. And so, every day I think if you haven't run a business, small business on your own, it's sometimes hard to understand, but just the amount of problems that get created every day. And to be successful, you have to really be level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you do this if you don't have, if you can't create sort of a sense of calmness and coolness and, focus every single day. Because you make a mistake here or there, you lose your cool here or there, you make a decision based on emotional response, and you could be paying for that for a long time. So that's another thing. I think running a business has taught me how to just stay really centered and focused and constructive on, on solving problems. And my wife and I were joking about this the other day. We have 3 little kids. She runs her own business too. And we were talking about how running a business, managing a team makes you a better parent. I'm confident in that. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of that skill set, the patience and the calmness and the steadiness. There's a lot of applicable skills that go back and forth.
Well, since we're sort of exchanging sort of war stories here, because having worked in politics, several other things. I think I mentioned I ran the communications for Bill Clinton up in Delaware in his second campaign. And one of the things that happens is that obviously you want somebody from the administration to show up and, cheer you on. So we had both the First Lady at one time and then another time the Vice President come on. And working with the Secret Service perhaps is an experience I've never had before, because I never realized how much detail they want to know about everything. What streets are you coming up? What bridge? How tall is the bridge? Doors you're coming in, streets you're coming down. Who are the people who are going to be there? How many? All of those kinds of things. So that I picked that up, and it stayed with me, because I've also seen times when details were left out, and then the wheels came off of a program because nobody thought of it. Or that everybody who's involved in the program needs to be at the table when the decisions are being made.
Yep.
Don't do this thing about, okay, let's do it this way, and then, okay, you go and give this part to John and tell him this is what he's got to do.
Absolutely. The details matter. I'll tell you, I'll tell you a story, if that's okay. I was, it's funny. There's a speech I wrote one time. I wrote 55 drafts, 5 over the course of a year. It was a big speech we had to give. My boss was giving Israel's response to the Palestinian UN statehood bid in 2012. And I worked on the speech for a year, and everyone in a diplomatic office, it's sort of like everybody wants their stamp on the big speeches. So the legal advisor, the political advisor, the guy in town from Jerusalem, the outside consultant, everybody had a different take on what this speech needed to be. And every time they gave a different take, the ambassador said, why don't you go try a draft like that, see how it feels? So we got up to 55 drafts the night before the speech. And we're in the office, and I ended up, I was almost at that point totally broken. I said to the chief of staff at the time, I said, I'm not writing another draft of this speech. And Israelis can be tough. And she just looks at me, and it was like 3 a.m. We're in the office. She says, stop crying like a baby. But we ended up getting the speech. We sent it in to headquarters. Usually they would look at stuff. And headquarters came back and didn't like our final draft. So they rewrote it themselves. And I remember the ambassador he said, this is unacceptable. So we ended up getting on the phone with some other leaders at the time. And I had to write this speech in 30 minutes from scratch again for the 56th time, an hour before he gave it to the world. And I remember there was no margin for error, right? I had to, they were dictating it. In the middle of me writing it, I was sitting in his office, and there was like 40 diplomats sitting in that office all watching me. And I'm typing the speech up, and all of a sudden the computer breaks. His computer starts flashing, and it breaks. Mm-hmm. So I'm writing the speech out longhand, and I've got some other computer, and it's like a mess. He leaves and goes to the UN, and I have about 20 minutes to take all my different chicken scratches and notes and everything else, put it together into a format. He never even read it or reviewed it, printed it out, sprinted over to the UN, and gave it to him just before he walked up on that stage. But I knew it took 2 years of training to be able to do that, to have the confidence in myself to be able to deliver. So, in such a high-pressure environment, to get all the details right. And we were successful in the end. But it was but I hear you. I think that it's a lot of the best experiences are the most challenging like that.
Mm-hmm. And it also depends upon who you're working with too, because when I was working with the Assistant Secretary of Education, she didn't want speeches over 12 minutes. She said, I can say everything I need to say after that, and if people want more, you just ask me some questions. And one congressman, he said, well, look, just write bullet points for me, because I've got things I want to say that you don't know anything about. So, just write the bullet points. So remind me. So you've got to understand how people want things done.
Mm-hmm.
That's
absolutely true.
So that you can get it done right. And the other thing about that also is dealing with people. Just because you have a superior position doesn't mean that you can overrule. I shouldn't say overrule them, but handle them any way you want to, because some of these people will have some of the things that you need, and if they knowingly give you something that's wrong and you show up with it wrong, you're embarrassed. They can screw you, so you've got to make sure that you are. And there's a difference between a manager and being a boss. There's a difference,
right.
And people need to learn what that is. Because they can, you go along to get along, and things work out a lot better for you.
Exactly, that's exactly the case. And I watch it in my own office over many years. Social dynamics are everything, especially when you're working in a high pressure environment with a lot of smart people. You've got to be able to figure out how to bring people with you and not turn them off. And that's a real skill in itself.
Well, add to that too is that people need to learn to work together. Because having worked in that office, and I was in the government, and it's still going on today, I hear, but people are still working in their silos. They do their own little things in their own little areas, and they don't share that information. And somebody needs to recognize that and get in there and let's tear these walls down, because there's a lot of duplication of effort going on in some places, and that's a waste of both time and money that people need to get their hands around.
That's absolutely right. I've been in a lot of different environments with clients or, whatever, where you see that, and healthy organizations figure out how to root it out and get people working in an efficient way. Absolutely.
The other thing that I suggest, because from time to time I do lecture at some of the college PR or PRSSA classes, and I try to tell the students, get as much experience as you can, because a lot of times you just never know when it's going to come in handy for you.
Yep.
And help you solve some problems. Having been in radio for a while, I remember having a congressman down in Brazil some years ago, and he was down there with the president at some environmental conference. So I'm just wondering, how am I going to get him some media coverage? Because, the media down there, they want to talk to the heads of state, not a congressional delegation. So I called... Yeah. No, I was about to say, I called several radio stations in New York and asked them what are they going to do about covering that conference. They said, well, I guess it's, they call it rip and read. Just pull a copy off the AP wire and read it. Well, I asked them, would you be interested in talking to the congressman directly from there? They said, oh, absolutely. So I had to figure out a way to basically have his aide to call me at the office, and I would transfer the call up there. That worked so well. I got him doing 3 interviews from Brazil with New York radio stations.
That's amazing. That's it. You got to be. This business is all about thinking quickly on your feet, pivoting when you need to. When one door is closed in front of you, you kind of look around and you see where another one's open. I want to go back to something you said before about kids, young people. Here's something I say a lot. Your title is a lot less important than your skills. A lot of young people coming out today they're focused a lot on what's their title going to be, or how prestigious an organization are they working for. I think your first 5 years in professional life is, the most important thing is, what skills are you building that are going to be invaluable for you in the future? Meaning being able to write, in a way that's clear, concise, and compelling, or developing deep subject matter expertise in an area that's going to be really valuable where you will be an expert. And I think there's not enough folks who are taught that out of school. They just sort of think it's a generic thing. The key is, how can you begin to really start to specialize and start to build those skills that will be useful for you moving forward in any job that you take, but particularly the job that you're focused on. I'm shocked by, we have a writing test at our firm that folks have to take, and 90+% of people fail that test. And it's not that hard, I have to say, but if you can build those hard skills, you're very employable. And I think that's something we tell all our interns, and something I tell all the folks that I speak to when I go to speak in universities and things like that.
I agree with you. And let me add to that. I like to run across kids who have that go get 'em attitude.
Yep.
I don't know, but if you will, let me work with it so I can learn it, I'll be glad to help you. I did not see too many of those. Just said most of them want a high-paying job with a nice title, but they don't have the skills to go along with it.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You know, we have learned. It's funny. I look for certain things that when we're recruiting. I'll tell you what. They're interesting kind of proxies for that attitude. People who are athletes often have those core skills of resilience and grit and determination. Or folks who had a job in a different field that was challenging, whether they were waiting tables or they were, you know, we look a lot for grit and resilience. Because it's hard when you first start in my business, in the PR business. There's a learning curve. Even if you've been at a great school with a great public relations program, and when you're in that seat, there's going to be a period of intense learning, and it's going to be uncomfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my firm, because you know we're doing high level work and we have high expectations for our team. So a core question is how resilient is that person going to be, and are they going to be able to dig deep and be excited to grow and learn? And usually, if somebody has demonstrated that at another time in their life, it's a good indicator that they'll be able to do it once they're sitting in that chair as a associate at our firm.
Well, the other thing I think that I've talked to some professors about that some of the students are missing is being able to speak on your feet, public speaking. He said a lot of them just don't have that skill because they spend too much time on their telephones and they don't communicate with each other. And, you know, being in public relations, if you can't talk to somebody, you got a huge problem on your hands. That's no question about it.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. We call that executive presence, and we rank people on that. And, you know, in terms of, we help people work on it. It's a lost skill, just like I see writing. And the people who are able to speak on their feet and be compelling, they're at a huge advantage.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm glad we had a chance to cover a lot of these issues, and I'm glad the topics that we did cover, because my audience falls into the Gen Z millennial category and age range. So that's the basic, and a lot of them I'm sure will probably appreciate some of the things that we've mentioned here today.
Yeah, well, I hope so. You know, we have a lot of interns and young associates from that age category. And I think it's like anything, you know, there's really great Gen Z millennials who have all those, like, who want to work hard. It's just a question of finding them and, you know, and engaging those who really embrace those values at this moment. And I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity in our field for those who can both understand all the new dynamics of a changing media environment, meaning, you know, everybody is a publisher today, as demonstrated by our conversation. The traditional media is changing dramatically. There's fewer outlets. There's more small outlets, and obviously social media in digital strategy. So if you can understand all the nuances of that changing environment, but also have those core skills: writing, critical thinking, listening, public speaking, those people skills that you were talking about. I think if you're a well-rounded professional in that sense, there's a huge amount of opportunity right now. It's an exciting, changing and growing field, is my view.
Well, I'm going to say that was well said and well spoken, and I'm sure my listeners will certainly appreciate that. You know, we've covered a lot here today, Nathan. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you think that our audience should know.
I'll say one other concept that I talk a lot about in our company, and I'll leave them with this. It's the concept of compounding. And, you know, they talk about compounding interest, right? You put some money in the bank, you get $1 the 1 year, and then the next year you get interest on your principal and interest on your interest. And I think our business and business in general and life in general is a compounding phenomena. Meaning, they're compounding phenomena, meaning you do one good thing in our field, you know, if it's a media program, you start to build visibility and you build a relationship with one reporter that leads to a relationship with another, and more and more and more. And the same thing is true about your career. Every step you take matters. It's either going to be compounding in a positive way, meaning building you more skills, more networks, or it'll be compounding in a negative way, creating problems that you have to clean up later. And everybody makes mistakes, and that happens. But if you think about the decisions you make in your career, you want to have every interaction be compounding in a positive direction, and that's, I think, something I've tried to consider as I built my firm, and I think it served me really well. Good leads to good leads to good. So that's what I'll leave you all with today.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you to Nathan Miller. He is the founder of Miller, Inc., a public relations firm located there in Los Angeles, California. And I also want to thank you, my listeners, for joining us on this. And I certainly hope that we've transmitted some information to you that not only you can use in everyday life, but also in the public relations arena. So if you've enjoyed the show, we certainly would like to get a good review from you, and also share this information with some of your colleagues. And don't forget to listen to the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.